Oh, you can go ahead and get started.
Well, I'm having problems with my phone. So I don't know how this is gonna work. I can't really see the screen too well. And so I'll just try the best I can.
Excuse me, Chris. What you might be able to do, I don't know if have you considered on you and Chris Jr. being together and doing it. That way you all, if his phone or his computer works, it'd make it easier.
Oh, I mean, like sharing from his phone? Okay, he would have to reply. Huh? What do you mean?
No, I'm not saying set up an account. I'm just saying that you all be on use the same phone or use the same camera. And
yeah, I thought of that. He would have to recite everything that's being said because my hearing aids cannot connect to his phone. You see?
Yeah.
So I mean, we can go and try, or if you want to postpone it to next week when I get another phone, or it doesn't matter to me. Whatever works best.
Okay, I understand. So go ahead, Chris.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to really open up to the group and share some. I felt that I want to. Tracy's been doing a lot of the meetings, and I wanted to, share some so that he's not always having to carry it. And I think that I would like to see where is more people sharing other than Tracy doing it all the time. So I decided, I'm just going to share something that what I'm going through and share with the group and, see what you guys say, see what you guys think. So as you know, I have been trying to establish my honor society. It's been challenging. I've started to see areas where I am needing some help, or areas where I really don't know how to move, what position or what direction to go in. I'll give you one example. In my house, I feel like that I'm I feel like that I am the one who has to carry the responsibility of everything. Now you got to follow what I'm trying to say when I say that. As a father, I know I'm supposed to carry that, but what I'm getting at is that it can feel at times as though I guess the best way I can explain it is give you an example. My daughter, her hair was down to her mid back, and when she get home from school, I would tell her what she needed to do to take care of her hair. And so you need to, I've got on the internet and read up on some things of what she needed to do to take care of her hair. Well, she really did not share an interest in what I was saying, or have an interest in what I was saying. So I talked to my wife about it, and she really did not have an interest either. Well, over a course of time, my daughter's hair broke off. So now her hair is above her shoulders. She lost over a foot of hair. And so when I first spoke to my daughter, I said, you see, look what happened. You lost your hair. It broke off because you were not taking care of it. She then says that she then says, in short, that she didn't take care of her hair because she doesn't know how to do it. So I go to my wife and I said, why doesn't Kyla know how to take care of her hair? My wife says, well, Kyla does not want to know how to take care of her hair. She just wants me to do it. So Kyla, my daughter, is blaming my wife, her mother, and my wife is blaming her daughter. And you got two people blaming each other. The daughter is saying, I don't know how to do it. No one has taught me. And my wife is saying, well, she doesn't want to do it. When I do it here, she doesn't want to learn. So what happens is, I feel like I have to take responsibility now to take care of my daughter's hair. Amongst all the other things in my house, all the little small things, whether it's making sure the doors are locked before everyone goes to bed, or whether it's making sure we have the curtains closed before everyone goes to bed. It's so many little things that I'm feeling like I shouldn't have to take on the responsibility. These are grown men and women in this house, and each member can take on these little things. It's not everything shouldn't be on me. So what I do is, okay, I'm gonna take on the responsibility. So I'm gonna start to see if I take care of my daughter's hair. But when I do that, I'm feeling disgruntled. I'm feeling like, this is too much weight. Other people should carry some of this weight. And it has an effect. It has an effect on my relationship with my family members, in my house. So because of this, I'm carrying this weight. My relationship with my daughter is on the fence. I'm feeling like no one wants to be responsible. It's all on me. And if I stop, then everything stops. The house will go catch on fire, so to speak. If I don't say let's clean today, nobody cleans. If I don't say let's do this, nobody does it. It's just nothing. Everything stops. So I'm opening myself up to the group, and I'm saying, how do I fix this? What do I do? What's the cause of this, and how do I fix it? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. All right. I don't want to be the one to start out, trying to answer that. I think Chris really, he's heard me on different occasions on different things like that. So I think everybody should comment and share what you see or think. And I'll try to fill in what came to my mind.
So I'll try not to make it lengthy. So my mom and my dad have had a similar struggle with me. And from the place of, from what I heard you say, the feeling you get is that the world stops if you don't do something, that the world, stops. But that's a lot of weight to feel. And so what I'm saying about my parents having the same problem with me, maybe from a different perspective, what I am learning is go to the ant thou sluggard. And so you started by saying that you wanted to take the load off of someone else. That's how you started speaking. And after you finished, the first person to respond is the person that you mentioned before you started speaking. And so an example that I would use as well is the seemingly enmity between my siblings and I, based off of my first description of my parents and my relationship. So in trying to keep it brief, I've been understanding go to the ant thou sluggard, that each member is strong enough to supply the next member. But how you do it is by taking care of yourself. So the problem that I heard you talk about is I seem to have went through the steps of this is how you take care of your hair. This is how you maintain something that you have. And it brings to mind a conversation I was having with Uncle Tracy this morning. And we were talking about you don't wear makeup to make yourself beautiful. You wear makeup to accent your beauty. And how the way you teach beauty to your child is by walking through the tests that they have hand in hand. That is the only way to teach them, or else it will only sound superficial. You will only hear brush your teeth 2 times a day because that's what everybody does. And you will have seeming a lack of interest between who you're trying to establish a relationship with. You won't have a connection. This is not very brief. It's a very lengthy thing that you brought up, because again, this is something that I am struggling with similarly in terms of building and rebuilding and establishing a relationship with my parents, where they have told me, just like you stated, ways that I can look up how to maintain my hair. And I didn't have an interest for it. It wasn't like I was trying to be rebellious though. Like, it was just like, you're telling me something good, but I don't want to listen. So I'm going to do whatever I want. But that is what happened. So back to now, my hair is above my shoulders, when before it was blossoming. And how I've been having to work through it is by understanding vulnerability, which is, again, the point that I think above all the others I heard you bring up. So how you started by talking about removing the weight off of someone else and the honorable society and the making of that. That is seemingly an abstract picture in our heads that we get because, like you said, if I've taught the people in my house how to conduct themselves, why don't they listen? Why does this happen? And when you start talking about it, it's about the vulnerability that lacks in us today, the empathy that we're supposed to have for our fellow man. I'm not sure if this is making sense or if anybody can tie in what I'm trying to say.
So Jay, I heard you say, I heard you say a couple of things, Jay. One of the things I'd like to highlight that I felt repeatedly came out is that the value that you place on the responsibility can sometimes be crushing to the people that are under you. The fact that has to get done, otherwise the world is falling apart, is crushing to a different type of person who doesn't have the same type of value in those responsibilities. It can be crushing. So when you say it's me, I have to do this, and nobody cares, yes, that feels as though nobody cares about things that are actually important. But also getting somebody to understand that something is a need for you and who you really are, not just a need for you, but understanding that you're doing this because you care, and communicating that effectively is a big part of getting in sync.
Okay, and so you talk about getting in sync, and this is again going back to how he even posed the problem. We are a group of men that are just as ordinary as the next. We live lives, we go to work, and we have problems. And the focal point of this is getting to the solution or the conclusion that, again, what we are doing is not in vain. There is a purpose behind what we're doing. And so you were talking about the responsibility crushing those that don't place the same amount of value in that system. And if you look outside, that's what we're trying to talk about, that the picture of healing is one that surpasses our knowledge. We, as humans, do not like that. So it causes problems. And the only way to fix these problems is by vulnerability, or going back to the starting point of what is to be.
So just clarifying the last point that Jalen, what he was trying to say, the last point that Jalen said was, he pointed at a starting point of what is to be. That's really describing standard, a standard, and a way of explaining standard. One way of explaining standard is to say that everything was created or made to function in a certain way. So when it is brand new, like a car, there's a standard of operation or a mode of operation and a standard of operation of that car. It has to, you put gas in the car, it should be able to perform these tasks. You have oil in the car, it should help it perform these tasks. If you have gas, oil, whatever the car needs, and it does not perform the task, then it is beneath the standard or the normal mode of operation. So there is a standard, I'm describing standard. There's a basic way that something is made and is designed to operate. And as long as it is operating within that, its basic way it was designed, then it is performing properly and it is meeting the standard. If it falls beneath that particular point, then it is not. So Jalen's last point was saying that in essence, you have to have a standard to go by to determine what is actually under par, what is actually off, what is actually broken, things like that. His last point is tying that point in.
I agree. I think that is always really good. So my question is, what if responsibility is caused from being under, or let's back up, if responsibility is something, let me say that again. If responsibility is something that is conceived from a standard, what is the initial point that a standard is created from?
Let me see if I can ask it another way. Standard, or I'm going to state it, standard should tell you what is your responsibility and what is not. So I want you to think about something here in your question, Chris, and then maybe you can re-ask it or present more of what you're really asking. If a person has been oppressed, for a lack of a better way of saying it, if they have been a slave for a space of time, and in that period of slavery, they were taught that to do particular tasks was standard. So in other words, for you to be able to build brick without straw, things like that. You don't need water. This is a wild example. You don't need water to build brick. And the standard of building brick is to be able to do it without these particular things. Then you start in your life building brick without straw, building brick without water, because you basically understand that this is the standard. Then you will be carrying a responsibility that does not belong to you, because the real standard says that straw and water is standard. So the question is, how do you know what is your responsibility and what is not?
Okay. Hey, I'm gonna have to get off this. Hold on, I'm not get off, and I'm gonna try to switch with Chris Junior's phone. We're gonna try to do a co-op together on one phone. This is not working out on this phone.
Okay. So, I'll get a response from Chris when he comes back. But did that make it sense? What I said?
Yeah.
Oftentimes, go ahead. You were going to say something, Jalen. Go ahead.
So from, again, what I heard you say is our concept of time will almost dictate when, I guess, we look at standard. So when you rephrase the question, why I almost, because I had a question about his question as well. When I heard it, it was almost like, again, you're not supposed to, standard shows you're not supposed to look at standard only in your time of need. It's not a like a genie, like in a lamp that you know what I mean, you just make a wish. It's not that. It's looking at standard tells you what is your responsibility.
So real quick,
Exactly.
So what I am hearing and what I'm questioning is the definition of responsibility, because responsibility, it, like you said, if you break it down to standard, it gets really simple, it gets really basic. But oftentimes I see that we add things to standard that society adds to certain standards in order to be acceptable or to keep things in a certain light. And that's why I kind of was saying that you put so much value in responsibility, but responsibility oftentimes gets mixed up with society.
Mm-hmm.
Correct, Micaiah. That's good.
Yeah, that there are a couple of points that really stuck out to me. What Micaiah just said, and it'll probably be jumbled just because on one hand, I wish Chris was on, but what he spoke to in one sense is what's been on my mind specifically this week. Some of the challenges that I've been going through, if you want to call it that. So one thing that I also want to say is Chris first mentioned that he was trying to, one of the reasons why he shared was addressing that Uncle Tracy for a lot of these, and I know Micaiah has initiated a lot. Uncle Tracy has initiated and led conversation often, and that sometimes that in and of itself can be a burden as far as an extreme or a weight, but an extreme in that everybody in this group, there's a point of contribution. So I just wanted to address that first. As far as I'm concerned, kind of like what Uncle Tracy said about the podcast, I'm someone who really, in most aspects, strays away from being in the spotlight, being, up front, all that kind of stuff, as far as the point of in the spotlight. But I do think that there's definitely a point for me initiating in a certain way. So I'm trying to work out that in and of itself. So from that point with what Micaiah said and what's been shared, one of the first things that popped up in my mind was when I first moved up here to Ohio and Uncle Tracy was going and working with me and my sister, and this was the first that I ever heard him talk about carefree and responsible, so those terms specifically. And so there is a point, I believe, to personality or person. Uncle Tracy talked about function, so he talked about a car. I think that can be true for an individual, but it can also get more general meaning that as individuals, we all have strengths and weaknesses. We all have limitations. There's also a point of responsibility. There's a contribution that we have. And so my contribution is not necessarily Uncle Tracy's contribution. It's the point of the verse that says, every joint supplieth. That's how I see it, at least. So it can be as far as an individual. It can be, we talked about this on the last podcast, the responsibility of a father or of a man in relation to a woman, sort of idea. But I think, as you guys have brought out, responsible and responsibility is something that's been very convoluted in our society. I think that in one sense, it seems to go just past the point of personality. So again, it gets into the every joint supplies, but what I'm trying to say is, I see responsibility as something that is done in return. So it's something that is done in return. If you have, so Uncle Tracy talked about slavery, for example. If something, and it gets into how we see debt. So if someone has grown up in an oppressive system, if something is done in one sense for them, they feel the need to repay. This is something, at least as an individual, that I've often struggled with. So when I moved in with Auntie B and Uncle Tracy, and they were working, one of the things that I really had to work through was this need to just repay. How do I make up for it in one sense? And so I believe that responsibility is something that is done in return. The first point in my mind is it makes me think of the 10 Commandments when it says, love the Lord your God. And then it goes on to say, love your neighbor as yourself. You can see both of those points as, in one sense, being responsibility. Why do I have to do it? It's not in the negative. And once the first point is God loving us, and that's not something that is just emotional. That is not just something that's surface. That is something that's active. When Uncle Tracy talks about the action of something or the dynamic nature of something, God's love is dynamic.
May have, if we lose him, he'll get back on. Very interesting what CJ said. Some of the principles and the latter principle of what he was saying, Chris, is he said, I see responsibility as being, I'm going to call it responsive to, but what he described is that something causes you to be responsible. Something causes you to do that. And what he described was you have to have love first, and then you can act responsibly. So oftentimes, the point that I make is oftentimes people give, and they give from an empty place. They give from an empty tank because they have to. What Micaiah described. I have to do this. If I don't do this, nobody else will. But you don't have no fuel in your tank. And so you're giving without fuel, and that's what makes it so stressful or so harsh or so hard. So what God does is he does not require you to be responsible unless he has given you something to a mode of operation or fuel to be able to be responsible. You can't make a car run without gas. You got to have something in the tank. And if you have something in the tank, then it can be responsible to go 100, 120, 130 miles an hour. That's what CJ is really saying. You must check whenever you're in this place, always check to see if you are giving and doing from an empty tank. Then it is not healthy for you or your children.
Very good. Well, I think you guys really hit on CJ, Tracy, Jalen, all those who shared, really hit on Micaiah, really hit on some things that I can see and I agree with. This has been a very challenging time, very challenging for me, and it is a sore spot for me, and I've been really trying to find how to change this. I want to share something what my take of is as I been thinking about this, and I'm open, and it's open to to correction or however. I'm open for that. I'm being vulnerable here. For a while now, Tracy's been teaching on judgment. I didn't really fully know what judgment was. I had, I actually, when I was in the COG, that was one of my first lessons I taught in the COG about judgment and mercy. But little did I know. Anyhow, for a while now, he's been teaching on this, and I thought I understood it from an intellectual side, but it wasn't something that I felt was a thought that was conceived. I don't know if it makes sense, but all I felt when the things he was teaching was a bunch of seeds that were planted in my mind, planted, and it makes sense. And I can share little points about that, and and whatnot, but it still wasn't conceived. It wasn't till after I think last Sunday that I really began to see some points of what he said, and it made me turn around and reflect on my family and reflect on everything and my relationship with my daughter. And what I begin to see is that I've made changes in my life, but the effect of yesterday is still apparent on my house. And what I see, the cause of that was that I was unwilling to face judgment, to go through judgment. And I remember a time, when me and Tracy had a fallout a while back. I just refused to quit talking to him. And a lot of it was, when I think back of it, I did not want to hear him tell me about me. I didn't want to hear it. And I was unwilling to go. I was unwilling to be vulnerable and receive being picked on. So as a result, there was no covering from, there was no standard that could be set. And and because there's no standard that was set, I'm seeing these behavior traits on my house. I start looking at, the thought came to mind about the scripture of about the corn and wheat. It says something about how the corn and wheat, if it, I'm getting it, I'm gonna try to quote it as the best I can remember, but it may be all chopped up, but I'm doing my best. But the scripture talked about the corn and wheat falling to the ground, and if it dies, well, if it falls to the ground and it doesn't die, it bites alone. But if it does die, it grows in a sense.
There's much fruit.
Yeah, bring much fruit. The corn and wheat is a seed. The seed is referring to the man. The falling to the ground is the judgment that the man has to go through to cover his house. He has to be picked on, and it's the same walk that Yeshua did as he walked to the cross, as his journey to the cross, being picked on. And it feels like you're dying. It feels like you're taken advantage of. You feel misunderstood. You feel all kind of stuff. But a man has to go through that process to lose his ego, because his ego is so big. When he gets into a marriage, it would step on his children, it would step on his wife, it would step all over just to stay to keep the top. You see this in jail and prisons all the time, where you see men in prisons where they got these egos and they just clash over simply because of an ego. And I was unwilling to go through a dying process. And in return, I stepped on my wife, I stepped on my children. And now they display these behavioral responsibility because I failed to be responsible for myself first. Now I'm trying to tell them to be responsible. But responsibility really reflects when a man is willing to die. Then he's saying, I'll be responsible for his house, for my house. But if he's unwilling to go through that, he'll never be responsible. He can never cover his house. And furthermore, the value of his house is reflected upon a man willing to go through the dying process.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm thinking about all of this, and I'm just shaking my head like, wow. I'm gonna say that much and see what you guys think.
Well, Chris, man, we can put this on podcast. Damn, Chris. That was good.
Well, yeah, I especially like the part when you started talking about him. When you started talking about that man right there that just said, damn, when you was talking about the falling out you had. And I was thinking about, for one, when I think of Uncle Tracy, I think of some dude trying to talk to me about seeds that's sitting up there with my brother talking about seeds. And it's like, I want to play football. You know what I mean? I want to be outside. I don't want to talk about seeds. And then just like from that point of view to the seeds germinating. So basically what you were talking about, where we were just working together. So it was me, my dad, my brother, and my uncle. And Mike came down for a little bit, but as we were working together, I think we had about, I mean, we had some very intense moments where it was like the feeling of coming alive. Cause it's like, I was trying to tell him, it's the stuff that you're telling me that's making me act this way. You know what I mean? Where, so but where I was having somebody speak truth and me trying to not accept it. So, so my brother, right, where he's what I think of in terms of responsible. And again, the first time I heard the terms carefree versus responsible in that nature, where it wasn't a comparison of carefree versus responsible. It was carefree and responsible in that sense. It was always about how these things complement each other, never about how they take away from each other. And again, you might ask me like how, because it's like the things that he says, it's like he's just being mean. Like, you know what I mean? Like the things he says is like, it made me feel alive. And the only reason I'm saying all this, because he tried to tell me well, he asked it like in question form. So again, this is like, we've been on the job for like, I'd say maybe a couple weeks, and we started talking about the Bible. You know what I mean? You know, look, so again, where I just came from, I came from a low place. And so, you know, I started reading the Bible again, you know, and you can't tell me shit. Like, you know what I mean? I'm reading the same shit everybody else, but you know what I mean? I got all the answers now. Like, you know what I mean? There's nothing you got that I can't get. And he made me mad because he said, I bet you I got something you can't find. Like, you know what I mean? And I was like, no, you don't. Like, because it's, again, is he not just taking the position of my dad, that my dad always has something, you know what I mean? Oh, I know, nope, I know more than you because I'm wiser. I'm older than you. So yeah, it's actually funny because I was trying to quote a verse in Proverbs, and this is I'm trying to touch on responsible, carefree, and that nature. And for one, so like even starting off reading Proverbs, that was something that CJ was reading. So it was like, and Uncle Tracy had read it, you know what I mean? It was like, I don't really want to read this book because Psalms is so much more entertaining. Like you can, you know what I mean? He over here having all types of fun. And then you go to Proverbs, and as Uncle Tracy calls it, didactic, where it's just monotone. Like, you know what I mean? Reminds me of a teacher in a classroom. It's just like, and it starts off talking about children obey your parents or some shit. And it's like, you know what I mean? Okay, yeah, I already negate this because of my own trauma. And how Uncle Tracy was able to help me see things from a whole perspective, because that is how the Bible or scripture, the Torah, that is how truth is to be interpreted, from a whole perspective. If you are not whole, you will diminish it in trying to make it fit your standard. So yeah, he's made me very mad because what he's done has made me speak. And I'm not like my brother, right? So I wouldn't say I don't like the spotlight, but at the same time, in nature, I really am like shy. Like I don't have to be all in everybody's face all the time. But like, again, now it's like, no, I do. Like, you know, so seeing the true of some of these things has been, I'll say, fun.
Mm, mm.
And I can't say it like Uncle Tracy did, but when he said damn. But yeah, Chris, you really did bring out some things that just started making my mind go crazy. On one hand, I felt like you answered your own question. You brought out one of the biggest things that stuck out in my mind was death. And it also took me back to a lot of different conversations that I would have with Uncle Tracy. And one theme that I would say is that, so when he was talking, one theme you could say was that our society is unfamiliar with death. And so in one sense, it ties in what we were saying in the men's group, the previous podcast, when Uncle Tracy was talking about the importance of a father and the responsibility, if you want to use that word, of men to judge. one of the things that is also involved but not necessarily stated, because Uncle Tracy said then at that point that it's not about elevating the man, but it's really about putting him where he belongs. To judge, you must be judged to judge in one sense, as far as you have to come under the light or the scrutiny of God. And that is the light that you then reflect in your judgment. And that's kind of how it comes to my mind. But you talked about death, which is really important. In my personal experience, as Jalen said, as far as personality type, am more of a responsible person, and someone who was throughout my life groomed to be responsible, groomed to take on certain weights. What I learned from, you can often see this in women and children, from how they carry weight, because as we talked about in the men's group last week, I feel like what is generally the case is that men have elevated themselves. So the idea of a pyramid where the man or the king is at the top instead of an inverted pyramid where he's at the bottom. So if they're up there, that means that everybody else are the ones who truly are carrying weight, are burdened. And so one thing that I learned from quote unquote responsible people was that responsible was about sacrifice, but I have no idea what sacrifice was. My mom it's a point of, giving up your food if somebody else is hungry, or it had that kind of form of just being sacrificial in sort of a light, weird, doesn't make sense kind of thing. But when you talked about death, what responsibility then does in my mind is it relieves the weight of something. So it dies in order to remove the burden or the care of something. And I say care in that sense because, and you could say careful is like in the negative, someone who is holding on to or carrying weights. And so I've been learning what it means to be responsible. I would say more in the true sense, to try to bring life or to bring life or to remove the bondage or oppression of something, rather than just normalizing carrying weight. Because the point of taking in weight, just as so it says in the Bible, for example, in the New Testament, for example, suffer not the little children to come unto me, or cast your cares idea. As you intake those things or those weights or burdens, you then make the necessary sacrifice to relieve those. And I think in one sense that shows the relationship between responsible and carefree, or how the death of the father allows for the freedom or the carefree of his family. And so anyway, what I really appreciate you for sharing what you did, Chris. It was really interesting, really, really good.
Wow. You guys are really, really hammering some very good points. I'm going to continue on, let you all. I'm getting a lot of explosions in my head too, but I think you all are doing a very good job.
It's super interesting because it speaks to why the men's group was created. There's a space to where men have to be questioned in order to prove the validity of something that we hold on to. A lot of our society is built around, I hold me. I hold my identity because nobody else is going to hold that identity for me. And having someone to play the father figure and ask the right questions will essentially put you on the spot. For instance, in this situation, the question that I feel like is being asked is, are you saying that she needs to take care of her hair because you have an image that you want her to maintain? Or is it because it's standard?
Mm-hmm.
That is why we're here in the men's group. This is why we have these discussions, is because it puts that, it separates the wheat from the chaff. The same thing Jesus did. It separates what you're holding on to as you versus the actual you.
Yep. But I just wanted to say real quick, Makai, that was what that made me think of is from the previous session that we had. On one hand, I think you can see ego or egotistical. You can see it from a negative, but I think what I heard you bring out is that really no ego or no sense of self comes outside of the Father in one sense. So if we consider God, our identity is not outside of who he is, and that our sense of self is really formed or shaped by his reflection. But like you said, we tend to hold on, and Uncle Tracy's talked about this in with my family, the idea of persona, how we see ourselves, or who we think we are, and how we really hold on to those things. So it was really good.
That's that victim mentality of, if nobody's gonna hold on to me, I'm gonna hold on to me and take from everybody else.
I'm pretty interested to see what Chris Jr. got to say, because this is what he was talking to me about yesterday. He was telling me I was being selfish and needing to learn patience and stuff. He had some good stuff.
I mean, what with my dad had said, it shines some light on some things that I have been, at least recently, having trouble with, whether or not that I'm lazy. If, like you brought up, all right, the house needs to be cleaned, and he's usually the one that takes charge and say, all right, the house needs to be cleaned, so I need everybody to go help clean the house. But for me, I always had that feeling of like, man, I don't really want to do this. Or the constant feeling of holding back. And I really don't like that feeling of that. I'm just basically, I don't like that feeling I don't like that feeling, or I guess that accusation that to say that I am by nature a lazy person, someone who can't hold weight. Every time something is put onto me to be a responsibility, it always feels like I'm always just dropping it rather than sitting there and trying to hold what's been given to me.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's interesting.
And that's the thing I'm seeing. So it made me to start to think about myself, like on the lines of that you are a lazy person, or that you just for some reason or another try to avoid any and all responsibility, or something that makes you want to have to do something you feel like you don't want to do it. And knowing that the fact that there are times when you have to, there are some things that you have to do something, this has to be done, and there's no way around it. There's no it has to be, there has to be that driving force to tell you, okay, this cannot stay as it is. And that's just something I have been at odds with, because as I found out recently, it's really hard for me to get moving, or to do something that, to make me do something I have to do, I really try to push it off, or just stave it off, or just try to preoccupy myself, or just basically avoid responsibility in doing things. And for what my dad had said, it helps, because I see that he's saying that he feels like he can't handle this weight, and he's tired of the one always having to be the sparking force for action to be done. And now that, as so it's my turn to, well, it should be something that he's feeling too much. He feels like he's taking on too much, and it should be not my responsibility, but it should be a good reason for me to say, okay, I see that you're carrying too much weight, and so allow me to take on some of the weight that you're feeling, so that you don't feel too over encumbered or overwhelmed. That's all I have to say.
Very good. A few things I would like to share, and Chris Jr. kind of brought it back up for me. One is, I want you to understand weight. So I want you to understand weight. But I'm going to give an illustration. All right. Some of you have heard me say this before, but I want you to really think about what I'm saying. How you raise your children, how a father is supposed to raise his child. So I use the hot skillet scenario as an example. I, as a father, don't want my son or daughter to touch the hot skillet. So I tell them, don't touch the hot skillet because it is hot and it will burn you. I try to keep them, when they're too young to understand that, I try to keep them out of the kitchen, out of the way. I just try to keep them away from all of those kind of things so that they don't get hurt or burned. Then when they get old enough, a little older, I said, no, don't touch that. Don't touch that. It's too hot. In fact, they might reach for it and I might slap their hand to indicate that it's too hot. Now, I want you to understand weight. I'm talking about weight, how we bear weight or responsibility, how responsibility is taught versus how it should be taught. I want you to understand that. So now, I'm going to give it another way of teaching it. I understand that the skillet is hot. I understand that my child will get burned. When the child is at a right age, I am not going to tell the child not to touch the skillet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the skillet on, and me and the child together are going to touch it. And then as it's warming up, we're going to touch it. And as it's warming up, we're doing it. Father and son is doing this together. And as it warms up, the child starts, something registers in the child's mind that this is getting hotter and hotter. And after a while, they'll be like, that's hot. All right. What I taught the child is what he can do and what his limitations are. I taught him that your limit, he started learning there's a limit and how long, how much I can touch this. Something is causing it to be hot. Now, I might not do this one time. I might do it a couple of times or several times so that that child learns. All right. This child is equipped and understands responsibility, this is not my responsibility from this point. He understands this is my responsibility. I'm totally changing the word responsibility from how we placed it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm teaching you what you teach a child is how to be responsible. If you, what Jalen said in the beginning, when he first started sharing, he was trying to really say that a child best learns from the example of a parent. Have you ever noticed that a son watches his father cutting the grass and he wants to get a toy lawnmower so that he can look like his dad cutting the grass? Or a girl or someone in the house watches their mother vacuuming and they get a vacuum and the child wants to vacuum. You have to understand that. So it is by doing things together with the child, touching the skillet, vacuum, whatever it is, that gives the child the tools not to carry weight. If I say, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, and I punish you when you do, then you teach the child to carry weight. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Second point that I wanted to make when I heard Chris and all of the examples, all of the things that were shared, the second point that I want to bring out is that Chris was talking about really being responsible. And he was talking about the weight that he is carrying because he is being responsible and no one else is being responsible. The question that I ask, very interesting, the question that I ask is, how much of that was by design? How much of it was Yah, God, wanting Chris to carry that weight? And what was the purpose of God wanting him to carry that weight? He understood that it was weighing him out, it was wearing him out, it was breaking him down. He understood that. You see, God allows us to be in those kind of situations until we develop a muscle that begins to bring about change, to develop a muscle that begins to push against that challenge. He begins to, after a while, you stop, I can't do this no more. I've got to find answers. And it is those answers that liberate a nation, that liberate a world. So oftentimes, all the strongest levels of truth are only revealed through challenge. The things that we understand just off the top of our head has not been challenged, but you have to go through challenge, and it causes you to prove how much of that is not meant for that.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm just letting that sink in. That really hit home for me, and a lot of different points, but even specifically the point of what sort of muscle that is meant to develop. I didn't go into too much detail, but it's something that Uncle Tracy, that I've been learning from him for a very long time. But in my current situation, this is also kind of just what's been on my mind generally. I don't feel like everyone's contribution is the same. And even when I was thinking about, we work, you guys know, with the Gillenbecks, and they're within the Church of God, and they have a very fixed idea of contribution or provision in a certain way. So this is what a man does, this is what a woman does. So it might get a little bit mixed up, but one of the interesting things that that has really been on my mind is when Uncle Tracy in a couple different conversations was challenging, I see it in one sense how a woman provides. So one of the things that he went into was how women are to be beautiful, and how in one sense that is a part of how she provides for her household. So, and what's tying in my mind is the point of provision. I've been thinking in my own family, whether just my family at large, I'm living with my sibling, my sister right under me, and then the second oldest girl just moved in with us. I'm not sure if it's temporary, but what has been on my mind is how much we lack as a family if the women aren't providing in a certain way. So I'm not just saying, oh, they need to be cooking, they need to be cleaning. That I'm not even going to that point, but even the weights that they carry and how it keeps them, this is the same, that something that I've struggled with, how those things keep them from really being able to contribute, because a woman has a point of provision that nurtures, that brings life, that brings vitality to a family. So when Uncle Tracy was talking about pushing against something, I think one of the reasons why it's so interesting to me, because it can be very simple to say, okay, well, whether it's make somebody responsible for something, whether it's so as an individual, my sister has an experience like you, Chris Jr., where she was made to be, or my parents tried to make her responsible. And when Uncle Tracy was going through the example of how you see and mimic, one of the things that she saw was how much people accepted or normalized carrying weight, and she didn't want it. And so in one sense, you could try to force her to carry that weight, or you could try to make her carry the weight or the responsibility of a woman as it has been presented in our society. So no, you cook, you clean, you stay at home kind of thing. I think that even so, that point is something that I've seen Uncle Tracy start to open up or challenge since I've been with him. And that's one of the things that came to mind when he shared what he did.
So I question some of that, because I'm saying this for it to be challenged. It seems as though if a generation does not learn, a generation does not learn responsibility in the correct way, the sacrifice of the older generation has to be greater in order to heal that sense of rebellion, or not rebellion, or the pushback that you receive.
Wow, Micaiah. Yeah, I think you're onto something there. It doesn't sound realistic. It's hard to see that will ever happen. This is what happens in our minds. There are several factors that make this work. One of the factors is, as I said in the last podcast, I think I said in the last podcast, or I did a post on Facebook. If a husband is failing, now let's talk about accountability. If a husband is failing, the way that we're structured right now is that the woman almost has not very much of a choice, but to live with it, or she just needs to leave. In essence, there is no place for real accountability. The point that I want to make is that there should be a place of accountability if the man is not, if he is not performing correctly, there should be something, a way of holding that accountable. If that takes place, then what happens is it helps the men to begin to take on their role as the root of the tree. Again, I share, just for clarification, I share the man acts as the root, as the seed that falls to the ground and dies. We talked about that. It's the male that is sacrificed. And as he is sacrificed, he becomes the root of that tree. The woman is the trunk, and the children are the branches. As the trunk is healthy and whole and it sends up, I'm talking about in a relationship, in a home or household, as it sends up minerals and things up that the trunk, then it provides life, fruit, whatever you want to call it, to the tree. Then it produces that for mankind. So in short, the man is to die. But if he is not in that position of dying and he's at the top of the pyramid or the triangle, he is living and he's requiring his children to be the sacrifice, then what happens is we start having major decay. Then there should be something or some way to hold that man accountable so that he gets back in position. So I try to avoid some of talking too much about the Bible because I understand how the world is reacting to it. The terms, I mean, the word, whenever you bring up Bible. But here, there are a few examples that are made of accountability. The scripture says that, the Bible says that God is the head of Christ, Christ is the head of the man, and the man is head of the woman. In that same passage, it's not coming to me right now where it is found, but in that same passage, not long after saying that, it talks about if a woman wants to come into the temple to pray or prophesy, she must come in, and she has no covering. She has to come into the temple shorn. The idea that we have of that is that she has to have a veil over her face because she is less than as a woman. That is not the idea that it really was in the Bible. The reason why the woman comes into the temple shorn is a point of accountability. It means that there should not be any women that are uncovered or not valued to the point to where they have value. That's what it means. And so when you see that this woman is not valued, she cuts her hair, it is a disgrace to all of the men. It is to say that she has not been valued. She has not been protected. She has not been covered. That is accountability system. We have nothing like that today. If there was an abuse in a relationship, as an example, there was an accountability to deal with that abuse. It was not necessarily prison, jail, those things that we have right now. It first went into a judgment process. So if a woman or a son or a child went to someone and said, look, we're not being handled right, the tribe would inquire as to what was happening in that household. And then they would begin to bring judgment. Right now, our houses, we say that ain't none of your business. You get back over there and take care of yours and let me handle mine. this is how it looks now. So we have totally removed accountability. If you were to put the accountability back, it would help the male to begin to fulfill his role as a father. That's part of the answer. Just one of the examples and part of the answer to which you bring up, Micaiah.
That makes sense.
That was a really powerful picture. It'd been a while since you presented that about the woman going into a temple shorn. That was a really powerful picture of accountability. I don't know if I quite understood your question, Micaiah, but one thing that's been kind of going on my mind is how the Bible uses greater. One of the things that came to mind when you just presented what you did was this, obviously the story of when the Hebrew children leave Israel, and the strife and the challenges that generation had to go through. So in one sense, I've heard Uncle Tracy talk about often how it can be very difficult for older generations to make changes. In one sense, I don't know quite how he was saying it, but when something has grown into a certain shape, has normalized or justified, or has an idea of who it is or what's right, all that kind of stuff, it can be really hard to break those things. In one sense, younger generations are more receptive, more flexible, quicker, faster, whatever you want to say it, however you want to say it. But I do think there's really, not that I am trying to overstate it, but I do think there's a point to recognizing the harshness of older generations having to fight through this in the place or in the state that they are. And I think that's part of how I hear when you say making a greater sacrifice, the amount of push or force, even in initiating something. One word that comes to mind, Uncle Tracy uses, is pioneering, working with little information. On one hand, a lot of our parents weren't parented well. They didn't receive what they needed from their parents. They're not getting what they need or needed from their spouse. So there's a lot of breakdown. I think that's part of how I see the greatness, if you want to call it that, of the push of the older generations, or at least how I kind of see that word. I think that it's a pretty hard challenge, and it requires equal or greater push, even as they're addressing the decay of our society now. And I think that in that sense, where we are is really a reflection of them and a reflection of their fathers. It's a judgment in one sense, and they're having to come to grips with that.
I mean, okay,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that was part of what I was trying to understand or confirm, that the judgment of the father and how that sacrifice is built out a certain way because of the failures of the previous generations. And what you're looking at now is it reared its ugly head, and now we're dealing with what has been done so far back.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
One of the things that I'd love to share, Jalen and I talked about it. Y'all getting me in trouble because you make me talk about the Bible. One of the things I'd like to share from what you said, CJ, and what you just said, Micaiah, is John the Baptist. When CJ was addressing pioneering, CJ was addressing after generation and generation and generation of failure, or generation of the quality or the standard of life being removed and changed, all of those things, then it's a great lot. Then what he said, that it's a great, or it's a harsh or a lot of work for the person that picks that up after it has been done, damaged and skewed and all of those things. John the Baptist came at a time when the generations prior doing just what you all said. All of that has this family passed it down to that family, to the next family, to the next family of failure. And it was and it compounded and was huge. And it took someone that God made, you would almost say, not normal. You would say he ate locusts and honey. You would say those kind of things. It took those things. And that is, God sends a person or people into a certain thing that causes them to challenge that society and that then known problem or issues. That's what John the Baptist was. He was one who raised those issues after generation and after generation after generation had decayed and failed. The standard of men was lessened, and it was John that began the initial point of challenge to repair the house. It was John.
So
I
go
know
ahead.
you got, I know you got something to say. I just wanted to say real quick that that's Jesus. The point that it requires per scripture is death. If something has decayed so far, everything has to die about that father for life to continue.
Yes, I agree.
So, I mean, I guess what started coming up in my head is, so, and CJ kind of brought it up when you talked about greater. That would have been my question. What did you mean by greater, a greater sacrifice? Because what I am, not to overstate, but what I'm trying to say about Uncle Tracy is he's the one who told me these things about myself, right? He told me that basically I antagonize people. Like, he basically told me that, like, to my face, like, you know what I mean? And not basically, like, he told me that, like, to my face. And then, you know, he tells me things like I'm a slow processor. So we talk about, again, today, in the image that has to be killed of father, where it's like, you can't be a slow processor and survive. Like, you know what I mean? So instantly I hear what he calls judgment, right? Because who knows what judgment is? Because he, again, was one of the first people that his whole foundation relies on truth being true. And so I tried to argue the Bible with him. And what I am starting to see is that when I think of greater and when I think of coming alive, and like, so even the sacrifice of man falling to the ground, it's, I mean, it's in the King James version, so it's a Greek translation, but when you start reading Proverbs, when you get to the 4th chapter, instead of saying and making it personal about his father, he says, if you will hear the instruction of a father. So CJ was talking about the decay where we are, and again, there was one man, and so he talks about John the Baptist, right? There was one man that, again, when I recall any time of good in my life, it basically involved this man, you know what I mean? So even he's the only person that has ever tried to talk about seeds. He was understanding of the fact of listen and hear the instruction of a father, not per se my father. And that's what I was hearing CJ bring out in the greater sacrifice, that his sole purpose was for the growth of a different generation. So what he is doing and establishing, he's probably not going to see the benefits of it. He has no ties to investing in me, investing in this men's group, investing in anything, right? Just like anyone. So Micaiah, you talked about holding, I'm going to take care of myself. No one has any ties to anything. No one has to. And so, yeah, when he talks about seeds, it's that I am not respectable in terms of a superficial sacrifice. And so when you talk about the greater sacrifice, what it's been for me is understanding that it's not waiting on another generation to start to do what they're supposed to, no matter the state of decay, no matter if they are the ones who made it, right? No matter that, if you adhere to the instruction of a father. So again, this is where it's like, so, the Bible being as vague and as big as it is, and people wanting to pick points where it's like going back to the standard you have. Yeah. So it's like, I'm in.
It's all been good and thought-provoking. We probably better start winding it down. But I have not heard from Michael. I've not heard from Randall. So I'd like to hear what you all are getting or hearing.
So part of what I've been hearing is that you must have judgment. You must have some sort of communal. It can start from one, but it ends up becoming a communal approach to establish, especially through challenge and especially through understanding that you must die to your approach, or as Chris said, ego. The essence of challenge, breaking down your deficiencies and showing you what responsibility and accountability looks like through your community. We don't have that community established. I think that's what we are trying to do here, is establish a community that holds each other accountable to build this system. But there's just so much that I've been listening to that there's no way that I can. I feel like I don't have a good picture of standard. and it's almost to say that I don't have a good representative of a judge. The most growth that I had was in Michigan, and it came from really learning what receiving love feels like, and what learning the value of self-value and trust. And I think there's still areas where I do not trust my father, but the more that I am dying to my ideas, the more that I begin to trust my father, and the more that I do not run away from challenge, because there is value in that. I feel extremely behind, but I do not find self-pity in that. I'm finding great value in working, and not running away from challenge more and more. I struggle with being able to contribute to this group, and especially if my role in this group is to be an interviewer. We talked about it yesterday, me, Micaiah, Jalen, and little Chris. I need to learn to speak the language a lot better. I think Tracy had shared a video while ago, a couple months ago. I'm not sure who was in it. I think it was Dr. Umar, but it was a bunch of people around a table, and they were really on fire. They were really hidden. They were in a big, it looked like a stadium or something, and there was a lot of people really invested in it. It was really powerful. And I see myself as, after Uncle Tracy told me my role as an interviewer, I compare myself to others, the best. I try to compare myself to the best, but I don't ever live up to that. And I almost feel defeated. Like I'm just going to be the best that I can, because I'll never be as good as them. And so that there's just a whole lot. My mind is just scattered. I mean, you guys absolutely obliterated my mind. I feel like I am clay, like my mind is clay. And every Sunday or any time that I meet up with the younger guys, it's like I'm getting hit with water, like I'm under how clay is molded. And there's just a lot. It's just a lot. And I'm trying to find the motivation. I'm trying to find because there's I work, and then I want to go home and just shut my brain off and be absorbed in absolute nothingness, as far as like YouTube videos, movies, and stuff. And that is not helping me to grow. And so I'm trying to find the motivation to, Jalen shared a book that he's been reading, and I'm going to start reading that. But there's just a lot of work to do. I feel like the last thing that y'all really talked about, the weight of the generation, the pioneer generation. I feel that if I don't grow, then I'm going to be having to do a lot more than my father to pick up where he did not receive judgment, almost, in this family. So it's just really it's complicated in my head. Y'all make it so clear, and yeah, it's just my brain is all over the place. But everything that has been said is just fantastic. I appreciate it.
One of the things I'd just say, Michael, is when you were sharing that, I really feel that you, in essence, you need light. You need to be constantly challenged, constantly reflected on, and you have to adjust to that. So most of the time when I'm working with someone, especially if you're living with me, that is the thing that you have to get adjusted to. And as you're getting adjusted to being judged all the time, constantly under light, that's what builds you up or builds your strength up. And you won't be feeling like, oh, I'm deficient or I'm less than or I am this. What light does is really helps you know who you are, but it also helps you know where you are right now and where you should be. It helps you to understand if you are too much or you're too little, you don't have enough, or you have too much. Light does all of those things, and then it helps you to understand exactly where you should be. And once you are able to accept that, then life is a lot more easier. I have experienced here recently people who working with some who um, don't even know where they should be and um, struggle with judgment or reflection, just different things like that. And they are constantly unstable, uh, in and out, um, not consistent, all of those things. When light finishes, it makes you consistent, makes you to be able to maintain or be consistent at something. So I would say that you need much more of that, much more being in constant light, judgment, challenge, things like that.
Yeah, I want to jump in real quick and say this. I was thinking about something what you were saying, Tracy, and just the thought came to mind about um, you once said, I don't know, what thought came to mind is that judgment is actually a protection.
True.
Mercy is also a protection. The, the purpose of judgment is so that you can receive a covering. This is what we say mercy, receive a covering. It's likened to a seed and a womb. If the seed enters semen, covering semen, when it enters into a woman, well, if they say that semen would die in 15 minutes when it's exposed to air. As the semen enters into the uterus, it's the uterus that actually keeps the semen alive. The mucus in the uterus actually keeps the semen alive. It's a protection. What the uterus does is to protect this seed so that it can grow. That's the whole purpose of the uterus. It is protecting something, and it looks like this is what the scripture is calling heaven, a protected place that Israel entered into and protects so that something can grow. And if you don't have judgment, if the man fails to go through judgment, his family cannot enter into this protected place, and it causes lust of all kinds. A man has to first be committed to going through that process in order for his whole house to enter into this protected place.
Mhm.
Just thinking about that as you were speaking.
I had to say it again. Damn, Chris. So very, very good. we probably better close. I was trying to see, I guess Randall's not on anymore. I would say probably, I think Chris probably gave some of his summary. If you have more to summarize, since you started the question, Chris, you can, and what you've heard and concluded. And I would say, Mac, help summarize before we close.
You're wanting me to summarize?
If you had anything else, yes.
Yeah, if you have anything else, you can summarize. If you summarize, that's fine.
Oh no, if it's possible, I didn't hear from Randall or anything. I would, if that's okay, Randall trying to say something.
I think he can try, but his microphone was all shoddy. So I'm gonna.
Okay.
If he can hear, he can try. But otherwise, I would just go without him.
Appreciate all the comments. I don't know if you can hear me, but anyway, inspires a lot of thoughts. My phone not sending a clear signal frustrates any thoughts that I would have. So I don't have much.
So we covered a lot of ground today, and I think we touched on multiple points of accountability, trust, responsibility, actually what it looks like to build an honor society, and also the purpose of this group and why we're here and why it continues to grow. We all continue to grow. I think everybody did really well. And I'm very excited to see what else we can bring out of each other's, the shared experience that we have.
Great. All right, let's bring it to a close, and we'll see each other next week. And remember to answer the question that Micaiah puts up on the group text.
Okay.
All right, I'll see you all later.
See you later.